The timing was deliberate, the coordination precise. On a Saturday morning in August 2025, as most of the world focused on weekend routines, three democratic nations, Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom, delivered a unified condemnation that would echo through the halls of authoritarian power in Minsk. The joint statement was not just diplomatic protocol, it was a carefully orchestrated message that democracy's defenders would not stand silent while Alexander Lukashenko's regime continued its systematic dismantling of civil society, independent media, and political opposition in Belarus. The story behind this coordinated response began 5 years earlier, when the fraudulent 2020 presidential election in Belarus sparked nationwide protests that were met with brutal crackdowns. Since then, the Lukashenko regime had methodically worked to eliminate every vestige of democratic expression, turning Belarus into what international observers increasingly described as Europe's last dictatorship. But this latest joint statement represented something more than routine diplomatic criticism. It marked Canada's emergence as a leading voice in coordinating Western responses to authoritarian overreach. From his office in Ottawa, Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly had been quietly building the coalition that would eventually speak with one voice against Belarusian repression. The decision to partner specifically with Australia and the UK reflected Canada's strategic approach to international diplomacy, building bridges between traditional European allies and Pacific democracies, creating a global network of democratic resistance that transcended regional boundaries. This was not about geographic proximity to Belarus. It was about shared values and collective responsibility to defend human rights wherever they were under attack. The Three Nations statement carried particular weight because each brought unique strengths to the coalition. Canada offered its reputation as a middle power with strong human rights credentials and extensive experience in international mediation. Australia contributed its growing influence in the Pacific region and its recent experience in standing up to authoritarian pressure from China. The United Kingdom brought its post-Brexit determination to lead on global democracy promotion and its historical role in confronting European dictatorships. What made this intervention especially significant was its focus on civil society, the journalists, activists, opposition politicians, and ordinary citizens who had dared to challenge Lukashenko's authoritarian rule. The three governments specifically highlighted how Belarusian authorities had waged a systematic campaign to shut down independent organizations, imprison political leaders, and silence any voice that questioned the regime's legitimacy. This was not abstract geopolitics. It was about real people facing real persecution for exercising fundamental human rights. The joint statement also represented a sophisticated understanding of modern authoritarianism. Rather than simply condemning obvious abuses like the imprisonment of opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's supporters, the three nations highlighted the regime's more subtle tactics: the closure of NGOs, the harassment of journalists' families, the use of administrative penalties to bankrupt independent organizations, and the psychological warfare designed to make dissent seem hopeless. This comprehensive approach demonstrated that Western democracies were learning to recognize and respond to the full spectrum of authoritarian tactics. Behind the diplomatic language lay a human drama of extraordinary courage and sacrifice. The statement implicitly honored the thousands of Belarusians who had risked everything to defend their country's democratic aspirations. Students who faced expulsion for attending protests, workers who lost jobs for supporting opposition candidates, parents who worried about their children's safety for expressing political views. These unnamed heroes had inspired the international community to maintain pressure on a regime that seemed determined to crush every spark of democratic hope. The coordination between Canada, Australia, and the UK also sent a broader message about the evolution of democratic solidarity in the 21st century. Traditional alliance structures like NATO or the G7 remained important, but this kind of flexible, values-based coalition showed how democratic nations could respond rapidly to human rights crises without waiting for consensus from larger, more unwieldy international organizations. It was diplomacy adapted for the speed and urgency of modern authoritarianism. What distinguished this particular intervention was its timing and context. The statement came as Belarus had become increasingly isolated internationally, serving effectively as a client state of Putin's Russia and providing staging grounds for military operations against Ukraine. By condemning Belarus's human rights abuses, the three nations were simultaneously addressing the broader challenge of Russian-sponsored authoritarianism in Eastern Europe. The Lukashenko regime was not just oppressing its own people. It had become an active participant in the broader assault on democratic values across the region. The joint statement by Canada, Australia, and the UK represented more than diplomatic condemnation. It embodied the principle that democratic nations have both the moral obligation and the collective power to stand with those fighting for freedom, regardless of geographic distance or immediate strategic interests, in an era when authoritarianism seemed ascendant and democratic values appeared under siege. This coordinated response proved that the international community's commitment to human rights remained strong, determined, and increasingly sophisticated in its approach to defending the fundamental freedoms that define civilized society. This powerful display of Canadian leadership, bringing together allies from across the globe to speak with one voice against tyranny, reminds us why the West continues to be humanity's best hope for freedom and dignity. When Canada steps forward to coordinate international responses to human rights abuses, it demonstrates the unique role that principled middle powers can play in shaping global affairs. From the oil fields of Alberta to the corridors of Parliament Hill, from Minsk to Melbourne, the message rings clear: democratic values know no borders, and neither does the determination to defend them. If you believe that stories like this matter, tales of Canadian leadership, democratic solidarity, and the courage to stand up for human rights in the face of authoritarian brutality, then smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon for notifications. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand how real diplomacy works when freedom is on the line. And let us know in the comments which aspects of Canada's international leadership you'd like us to cover next. Because here at West is Best, we know that when democracies unite behind Canadian-led initiatives like this, the whole world becomes a little freer, a little more just, and a lot more hopeful for the future we're building together.